Some crimes shake a community, others will send shockwaves through an entire nation. But then there are those tragedies that expose something much deeper, a darkness that has always lurked beneath the surface. The murder of Sophie Lancaster wasn't just an act of violence, it was an attack on identity, on difference, on the right to be yourself without fear or intimidation. It was during the early hours of August the 11th, 2007. Sophie and her boyfriend Robert Maltby were walking through Stubley Lee Park in Bacup when they were set upon by a group of teenagers. The reason? They looked different. They dressed in a way that set them apart, and for that they were brutally beaten and left for dead. Sophie spent 13 days in a coma before succumbing to her injuries. Her murder wasn't just a senseless act of brutality, it was a hate crime, and it forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. How deep-rooted intolerance can lead to an unimaginable violence.
Time that you can hold them, because they've got so many things on, you can't even hold them. So they take the machines off, and I'd done her hair, you know. I waxed all her hair the night before, because that's the only thing you can touch.
Now in today's story we are going to talk about the tragic events that took place back in 2007 and to the sad and untimely death of Sophie Lancaster, as well as the attack on her boyfriend Robert Maltby. This was a crime that was labelled all over the nationwide newspapers and the news outlets in general, and it was labelled as a hate crime. But what led to this crime in the first instance, and what came of Sophie Lancaster's legacy? The murder of Sophie Lancaster, it has to be one of the UK's most chilling examples of hate crimes, and we have had plenty of hate crimes recorded in recent times, but personally I think Sophie's is perhaps one of the most horrific out of the lot, and it is the one which everybody seems to know about more than any of us. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to any of the other victims of hate crimes, but I think Sophie Lancaster's kind of, well, it raised awareness, didn't it, in the psyche of human nature in people here, not just in the United Kingdom but around the world, because Sophie's death, it woke up like the consciousness of a lot of people. And I think tolerance towards different beliefs, people's taste in clothing, music, the way they looked, obviously with the makeup. And I'm not just talking about the goth community, I'm talking about people in general. And I think it kind of woke up some kind of consciousness in a lot of people. And I think for the majority of us, more civil people, we do now look at people as individuals rather than objects of fascination. Now, Sophie Lancaster, at the time of her untimely death, she was 20 years old, and she was planning to attend Accrington and Rosendale College to do an English degree, and she was described as a kind-hearted and intelligent young lady with a strong sense of individuality. Now, she had been dating Robert Maltby, a 21-year-old art student, for 3 years, and both were part of the goth subculture, known for its distinctive dark clothing, heavy makeup and appreciation of gothic music and literature. Sophie and Robert, they were inseparable, and they were often seen wandering around, taking walks in and around where we are today at Stubberley Park, as well as in the town of Bacup itself. They were happy, they were in love, like I said, inseparable. But the attack that occurred here wasn't the first time that they would encounter some form of abuse. There were times when they were out in the streets, even when they were out with Sophie's mother Sylvia, when people would shout derogatory comments, derogatory names to them just because of the way they looked, the way they dressed. So the hatred that Sophie and Robert, and I would say a lot of people who dress in the goth clothing, it wasn't just fixed here in Stubberley Park back in 2007. They had encountered it many times before. On Friday, the 10th of August 2007, Sophie and Robert, they had been to visit a friend, and they arrived there around about 9 o'clock that evening. Now, it got to around about, 12, quarter to 12 in the evening, when they had made their way back here and towards Bacup itself. And it would later emerge that they were seen by a taxi driver going into a local 24-hour petrol station. And the guy who served them in this service station, he'd come forward later on and recall serving them with a little bit of alcohol and cigarettes. Now, outside of this service station, Sophie and Robert met up with some other teenagers, a small group of teenagers who were very friendly, and they all got into some kind of conversation. And it appears that some of the girls in this other group were showing a lot of interest in Sophie Lancaster's appearance. She had her hair with the red braids and the black braids, and these girls were being complimentary, and from all accounts it was a very friendly conversation that they all had. Now, it was just after midnight when the group of people, including Sophie and Robert, made their way here, and it is here where things would shortly take a sinister turn, because there were 5 boys ages between 16 and 17, 15, 16 and 17, who were in the park. And it was when they got to the skating area, which we're going to go to shortly, this is when things will turn very sinister and extremely dark, to the extent that these boys would begin attacking both Sophie and Robert. Now, one of the boys of the group of 5, he launched out at Robert, punching him in the face, and Robert himself reeled back in shock. He didn't fall over onto the floor, he didn't stumble onto the floor, he fell back in shock. And he kind of laughed, but in a nervous way, not in a mocking way, not in an antagonising way, but it was more of a, what was that for kind of laugh from all accounts. But one of the other boys said, "He's laughing, we can't have that," or words to that effect. And this is when this attack on Robert went even further. The 5 boys began laying into poor Robert, kicking, thumping him. And when Robert fell onto the floor, the attack became more ferocious. They were stamping on his head. They were jumping on his chest. They were kicking him in the head while he was on the floor. The attack was absolutely merciless, and it seems that Sophie tried to protect her boyfriend best she could, but the boys weren't having any of it, and she went down to cradle her boyfriend Robert's head in her arms to protect him from any more beatings. But this wasn't enough for the boys who were laying into Robert, and they turned all their attention now onto poor Sophie. Not content with beating Robert, the boys then began kicking and punching Sophie Lancaster whilst she was on the ground trying to protect Robert. Sophie, she will be drop kicked, she will be stamped on. The boys would run at her and kick her in her head while she was still protecting her boyfriend Robert. When she became separated from Robert because of the beating she was taking, the boys carried on stamping on Sophie Lancaster's head. She was defenceless. Now, there was another witness, a 14-year-old girl who was in the skateboarding park at the time. She saw what was happening, along with many other witnesses. But this 14-year-old girl, she got onto a phone and she made a phone call to the ambulance services, pleading for help and for the ambulance crew to get here as quick as possible. And while she was doing this, the 5 boys were still beating Sophie Lancaster.
Yeah, I can see the ambulance police right here, yeah. I can't see where it's going.
It will do, don't worry. Calm down for me.
It's coming, please send it to me.
I'm not going anywhere, but I need you to calm down. Yeah, I need you to be able to tell the paramedics if there's anything, you can tell them, but you stay calm.
The ambulance crew who were immediately sent for, they would recall at the upcoming trial that when they arrived here at the skateboarding park, they instantly saw 2 bodies on the ground. But it's only when they came to view the 2 people, the 2 teenagers, the ambulance crew couldn't make out what gender Sophie was at this point, because the beatings were so severe, so ferocious, and Sophie's head itself had swollen to an extent she was almost unrecognisable, and the ambulance crew had difficulty at that moment identifying whether it was a male or a female. They knew they had 2 people to attend to, and one of them was breathing very rapidly but in a shallow way, and the ambulance crew themselves knew that this was a life or death situation they were dealing with. Now, while this was going on, the 5 boys had fled. When they finished doing what they were doing here in the skateboarding park, they fled. The ambulance crew arrived, like we said. They attended to both Sophie and Robert as quickly as they could, and both Sophie and Robert would then be transferred over to the Rochdale Infirmary. Now, as you can see on one of the actual skateboarding ramps, there is some graffiti in memory of Sophie, which simply says, "Sophie, end hate crimes," and it says 2007, the year when obviously Sophie sadly lost her life.
Do you wanna feel how it feels? You wanna know that it doesn't hurt me? Wanna hear about the deal I'm making? You right up that hill. You and me. Right up that hill. And if I only could make a deal with God, get him to swap our places. We're running up that road. We're running up that hill. We're running up that building. If I only could. Jesus thunder in your heart, baby.
Now there are a lot of focal points here in Stubbley Park in memory of Sophie Lancaster, and there's just one here which says happy heavenly birthday, be at peace Sophie and Sylvia, David D. And it's here on this tree just opposite the skate park where that attack took place. And then down here, in loving memory of Sophie Lancaster, 1986 to 2007, to thine own self be true. And how true was Sophie to herself? She never deviated away from what she enjoyed doing in life. The way, like I said, the way she dressed, the way she looked in general, and the way she treated other people with human respect. She never deviated from any of those things. Now, as you can see, there are black roses tied to this tree, and we'll talk about the meaning of the black rose as the video goes along today, because it does play a prominent role in what we're going to discuss. But yeah, these memorial and the flowers, they are just opposite the skate park where Sophie sadly, well, where she was attacked back in 2007. By the time dawn was breaking on this Saturday morning, word had got around to to many of the people here in Bacup. And from all accounts, it does appear that a lot of people had a gut feeling who may have been responsible for the attack on Sophie and Robert, because the 5 boys that were involved in the beatings were well known in and around this area. They were well known thugs. They'd been in trouble a few times back with the police. So names were quickly mentioned, and it didn't take long before one of the 5 boys, Daniel Mallet, he would be arrested by the police and questioned for the attacks on Sophie and Robert, and he instantly admitted that he was part of that group. Now the police would then begin to monitor Daniel. They'd look into his habits, who his friends were, and where his whereabouts were on that evening, in the hope that they'd get more information. But it didn't take too long, and Daniel would soon give the names of his 4 other co-conspirators, if you will, and the police soon rounded up the other 4 boys. So before long they had all 5.
Time is up, the first light of dawn. I'll see your face today by the place we meet by the lake. At the break of day, you'll be the last one to know the things I think, the words I...
The names of the 5 boys who had launched this savage beating on both Sophie and Robert, the names are Ryan Herbert, who was 16, Brendan Harris, who was 15, Daniel Hulme, who was 17, and his brother Joseph Hulme, who was 16. And finally there was a boy by the name of Daniel Mallet, who was also 16. So as you can see, all very young boys. Now all these young boys were well known in and around the Bacup area. They were known as thugs, and they'd been in trouble, well, let's say more than once in their lifetimes with the police. They were known for shouting abusive comments to passers-by. They were known for assaulting people. They were thugs, they were savages, simple as. And the witnesses who were in the park at the time of the attack on Sophie and Robert, they would come forward obviously at the upcoming trial, which we're going to touch upon shortly, and they would say that the attack, it was nothing short of savagery and something akin to like a pack of wolves. It was like they'd got the prey and they wouldn't stop until they killed their prey. Such was the savageness of, like I said, the beatings. From all accounts, Herbert and Harris, they laughed and joked about this attack on the two goths, as they called them, two moshers back in the park. They boasted about it, and they had told other people that there were two moshers who could be dead. Do you want to go and see them? One of them even mocked the way Sophie was lying in the skateboarding park. It was so disgusting how they were treating this crime. Now, apparently, even when one of the boys was brought into the police station for questioning, his mother was also in the waiting room, and both the boy and the mother were laughing. They were laughing about the situation. We don't know what was said, but Sophie's mother, Sylvia, in an interview, actually says that the mother and the son were laughing whilst awaiting being spoken to by the detectives.
Because one of them apparently had gone to the police station with his mother, and they were both laughing and joking. They thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Do you have any sympathy for the way these kids were brought up? That means that they treat other human beings like they do their daughter?
No, not at all. You know, it doesn't matter how you've been brought up. You know the difference between right and wrong, and you should know not to jump and stamp on somebody's head.
This goes to show you the mentality that these 5 young boys had, and the lack of disregard for human life. I mean, as a parent myself, I can't imagine what Sylvia went through. Sitting in a police station and then seeing one of the attackers of your daughter laughing, boasting with other people about what he'd done. I think I personally would have gone into a rage. I think I'd have had to be held back, simple as. But it's disgusting, it really is. Now, we're in Whitworth Cemetery, and it's here where Sophie is interred. And we're here because Sophie herself, when she was taken to Rochdale Infirmary, she remained in a coma for 13 days. And after which, and after all the medical tests were done on her, she had suffered from horrific brain damage. And the medical advice was that she would never recover from it, she would never come out of it. The family made the difficult and horrendous, it must have been an horrendous, I don't think I could do it, I don't know. But they made that horrendous decision to turn off Sophie's life support machine. And again, I keep saying it, but I can only imagine the pain they were going through. 13 days after the attack, Sophie passed away. She lost her battle with life, and she's interred here in Whitworth Cemetery. Now, the night before they switched the machine off, Sylvia's mother, she spent time with her daughter in hospital, where she would wax her daughter's hair. It's the only thing she could touch of Sophie, because she had all these wires and all these pipes attached to her, monitoring her, so she couldn't actually touch her own daughter until that evening, when obviously they made that awful decision to switch the life machine off. But she spent the evening, like I said, waxing her hair and making her look beautiful, as obviously Sophie was. And then obviously the following day, that machine was switched off. Honestly, I can't imagine the pain and the grief that Sylvia and the rest of the family were going through. But we're here in Whitworth Cemetery, and we're going to place some flowers on Sophie's grave, and pay our respects like we always do with these stories.
If only could make a deal with God, get him to swap our places. We're running up that road, we're running up that hill, we're running up that building. If only could. You don't wanna hurt me. I see your deep the bullet lies. unaware of tearing you asunder. There's a thunder in your heart, baby. So much hate.
So as you can see, this is the final resting place of not just Sophie Lancaster, but also her mother Sylvia. And Sylvia passed away unexpectedly in 2022. But we'll read the headstone out, and it does say, in loving memory of Sophie Louise Lancaster, 26/11/1986 to 24/8/2007, always an individual, never a copy. Sylvia Helen Lancaster, 26/11, obviously there's no year, 12/4/2022. Celebrated difference, fought intolerance, loving Nana. But this is the final resting place of Sophie Lancaster and her mother, who fought so hard after the death of her daughter to try and make change and try and get people to accept other people's ways, the way they dress, the way they look, the way they talk. As it says here, fought intolerance. Now, as you can see, Sophie Lancaster and Sylvia's grave, they do have quite a few black roses, and these roses are symbolic in more ways than one. We know that they do symbolise death and mourning and loss. They represent farewells and the end of something significant or a mystery. But on a brighter side, and this is what we have to remember, on a brighter side, they also represent strength, courage, rebirth, growth, but more importantly, embracing change. And this is something that Sylvia fought so passionately about after the death of her daughter Sophie, and that was all about embracing change. The funeral of Sophie Lancaster took place here in Whitworth Cemetery on the 12th of November 2007, and there was huge national interest in this. The streets themselves were lined with many well-wishers as the cortege passed along, people walking behind the hearse. Local TV crews were filming the event itself. This story resonated, like I said, not just locally but nationwide, if not around the world, because it touched a lot of people. Now, with the death of Sophie, the police investigation had turned from one of assault into that of murder. And it didn't take long before all the boys started turning on each other during questioning. I think they realised at this point it was serious. I think all the laughing, all the joking, I think that had dissipated from the boys by now, because this was serious. This was more serious than they probably ever imagined. Like I said, the death had turned this into a murder investigation. And eventually all 5 boys would be charged with not just the assault on Robert Maltby, but also now for the murder of Sophie Lancaster. And all 5 would appear at the Preston Crown Courts to face charges. The trial began in March 2008 at the Preston Crown Courts. Now, prosecutors argued that the attack was motivated by prejudice, as the victims had been targeted purely because they were goths. And at the beginning of the trial, all 5 boys pleaded guilty to the charge of grievous bodily harm with intent. Ryan Herbert pleaded guilty to murder, Brendan Harris pleaded not guilty to murder, while the murder charges against the other 3 were dropped. As the trial opened, the prosecution told the hearing Sophie and Robert were singled out not for anything they had said or done, but because they looked and dressed differently. With the boys now charged and found guilty for assault and murder, sentencing in this case was set for the 28th of April 2008. Both Harris and Herbert were sentenced to life imprisonment, with the trial judge recommending that Harris should serve at least 18 years and Herbert at least 16 years and 3 months. In his closing remarks, the judge described the attack as feral thuggery, which raised questions about the sort of society which exists in the country. He also added that this was a terrible case which had shocked and outraged all those who had heard about it. The 3 other defendants who were also sentenced for their role in the attack, brothers Joseph and Danny Young and Daniel Mallet, who had all earlier pleaded guilty to grievous bodily harm with intent on Maltby, they were jailed. Mallet was sentenced to 4 years and 4 months, and the Young brothers for 5 years and 10 months each. On June 13, 2008, it was reported that all the defendants were appealing against the sentences for their convictions. The appeal was heard on the 7th of October 2008, with an announcement that the results would be released at a later date. Now, it was on the 29th of October the results of the appeal were announced. Ryan Herbert had his minimum term reduced from 16 years and 3 months to 15 years and 6 months. A reduction of 9 months after the appeal, judges ruled not enough allowance had been made for his guilty plea in the initial trial. Herbert then had his tariff cut to 14.5 years on 10th of February 2020, as a High Court judge concluded he had made exceptional progress in prison. Brendan Harris and 3 other defendants had their appeals dismissed. On the 10th anniversary of the murder, Robert Maltby gave his first full-length interview. He revealed that his brain had now fully recovered following the attack, and he had returned to his art studies but had struggled with depression and could not bring himself to immediately visit Sophie's grave. He explained that beyond working with the producers of Murdered for Being Different, he had been reluctant to talk about the events due to what he saw as patronising. He didn't like the way this crime had been depicted, and that he would be rather remembered for his career in art rather than association with the murder. Now, Robert would also go on to talk about the crime itself being made overcomplicated, and how he kind of resented the idea that this was simply a hate crime. He said there was more to it than just the way people dress, speak, the way they look, their interests, things that they do. He said it was more to it than that, and it was more about social implications itself, how people are brought up, how people are raised. I think this is what he was getting at, the way media portrays things. He said it wasn't just a case of being hateful to people just because the way they dressed, and he resented that comment. I can understand why the judge at the time ruled this was a hate crime, and why all the media outlets reported it as a hate crime. Like I said, Sophie and Robert were dressed in goth attire. They liked goth music. They stood out from the crowd. So I can understand why the media outlets all jumped on this hate crime. But for Robert Maltby, there was more to it than simple hate. Now, interestingly, Robert would also use the phrase victim blaming when obviously all this came out during the court and the years after, and it took him a long time to accept what had happened to poor Sophie. He struggled to leave his house for months, and even at the funeral itself, when he came here to Whitworth Cemetery and he saw poor Sophie's coffin, he couldn't believe how small it was. And he did an interview where he spoke about, is that what life is? You end up in a small box. There's got to be more to it than that. There was more to Sophie than a white small box. But he certainly struggled with the after effects of it all. And he also said in another interview that if he could swap places with young Sophie, he would gladly have done so, and he gladly would still do so. And he always kind of, from reading between the lines, I think he kind of blamed himself at one point for Sophie's death, because he did say to some interviewer that he would have rather wished that Sophie had just fled and left him there and looked after herself first. So I kind of think he kind of blamed himself. But he kind of struggled with it all, which is understandable. And like I said, for a long time, he kind of hated this hate crime scenario that the media were pushing, and kind of victim blaming in some way, just simply because the way they dressed, the way they looked. Like he said, there's more to it. It's more of a social issue than it is the way people look and dress, the way they speak. there's something more deep-rooted in what happened back in 2007. Following her daughter's murder, Sophie Lancaster dedicated her life to fighting hate crime. She established the Sophie Lancaster Foundation, SOPHIE, which stands for Stamp Out Prejudice, Hatred and Intolerance Everywhere. Sylvia said, "The thing that makes me most angry is that it is seen as an isolated incident. Maybe the seriousness of what happened to Sophie is isolated, but attacks are far from isolated. Just because you follow a different culture, you are targeted, you are seen as easy pickings." The impact that Sophie Lancaster's death and obviously the attack on Robert Maltby, it's left a long-lasting legacy. And the cultural impact has been huge. Documentaries and films have appeared, with the BBC producing a powerful dramatisation called Murdered for Being Different in 2017, which told Sophie and Robert's story and highlighted the prejudiced alternative people still face. There's obviously a lot of literature and art. Several books, plays and art installations are being created in her memory. Sophie Lancaster's tragic murder deeply resonated with everybody, and more so the music community. You have the goth, metal, punk and emo scenes. Her story became a symbol of the struggles faced by alternative subcultures, leading to numerous tributes in music and festivals. Now, one of the more prominent opener concerts is that of Bloodstock, and they have one of the biggest musical tributes to Sophie, as a stage was renamed in her name, and this was to try to keep her memory alive and to raise awareness of intolerance towards alternative subcultures. The festival also regularly supports the Sophie Lancaster Foundation. So that is all from here in Whitworth Cemetery, and we hope you found this video, I wouldn't say entertaining, but I would say interesting. We tried to raise awareness, obviously, of how we should respect other people, and Sophie Lancaster's death, it was tragic, it was unnecessary, it was barbaric, but it did resonate with people worldwide. Now, Vicky has a lot to say on this one, I think, when it comes to the 4 or 5 people who were involved. We know 2 of them certainly caused the death of Sophie, at least 2, and that was Harris and Herbert. The other 3 were involved, they were complicit in it, and it only needed one of them really to stop. You know, from the first punch on Robert Maltby, it only needed one of them 5 to say, look, stop what you're doing. And then, obviously, yes, they would have been in trouble for fighting, but at least Sophie wouldn't have lost her life. But none of them did they? No. None of them said stop, and they carried on beating Robert, beating Sophie, and Sophie ultimately, she passed away from her injuries. But
well, it's not beating, is it? It's stomping.
It was stomping. The word that was used, my nose is running. The word that was used was stomping.
Yeah. Stomping on the heads.
Stomping,
kicking at the heads.
Drop kicking on the heads, running at them, and then kicking them in the heads. It was graphic.
Yeah.
So, but Vicky, you've always said, haven't you? Life means life. Yeah. What's your thoughts on this one? Considering that these boys, 4 of them, are most certainly released into the public. Right. One of them set to be.
One, no matter what, one person out of them 5 that day could have stopped it happening. Okay, first punch, fine, but somebody could have stopped it. But the fact that they carried on like vicious animals, to me, they should have all actually got life. I don't care. Yeah. Just one of them could have stopped it.
Yeah.
Secondly, I know life is for life, and I think even when they're young, is it 15 years?
15, 16 and 17, yeah.
No, I mean years for life.
Right, yeah.
It's 15 years this is classing it as. I'm sorry, no. These, like you said a minute ago, these can go on and live their lives.
They've got lives to live now.
They've took Sophie's life. It's not just they took Sophie's life, they've took Robert's life.
Yeah.
Robert, no matter what, I know he'll say he'll go on, he's got to live his life, which he has. Yeah. But he will constantly have flashbacks, nightmares throughout his life. Even his family will have this.
And we've got to remember, if Robert, he may well have children, but if Robert goes on to have his own children, how protective is he going to be with his own child? Wondering where they are they're safe? you know, what kind of world are they going to be brought up into? You know, he's going to have, like Vicky said, all these flashbacks, all these memories constantly.
And the fact Sylvia died in 2022, the year the first one was getting
So when
released,
Herbert was released, and I didn't pick up on this until we were walking around, but Vicky's right. Sylvia passed away unexpectedly in 2022. This same year, Herbert was released, or set to release from prison.
One of the two who got life.
So did she die from...
Not being able to live with it?
Has she given up with the fights?
We don't know, but as
a
parent...
Yeah, it must have been awful.
And the fact this other one is going to be able to get out next year.
And can I just mention, Harris himself, Brendan Harris, within a few months or a year or so of being placed into prison, he also attacked one of the workers there, a health worker. He also attacked somebody whilst in prison. He's got no remorse whatsoever from what I gather. But it's the fact that people will say, well, they were only young lads, they've got lives to lead themselves. Sophie hasn't got a life to lead anymore.
Society, growing up, you know right from wrong.
You do know, and Sylvia said this in an interview. Them boys knew right from wrong. They may well have been drunk at the time. They still know right from wrong. They still know not to do what they did, to stomp on somebody's head over and over and over.
And this might sound graphic, right, I'm sorry, but as soon as that one of those five saw the blood coming from one of them, come on.
You stop. But they didn't show any fear, did they? They didn't show any fear. They didn't show any remorse.
What does resonate with me is when we were watching and her mum said, you know, she was going into the hospital for those 13 days because she was unconscious.
She was in a coma. She was in a coma.
And obviously she wasn't allowed to touch her because she had all these things, but she could play with her hair. And the day...
Yeah, the night before she did turn the machine off.
Yeah. And the night before they turned the machine off, and she knew she was going to die.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's... How do you as a parent cope with that?
Yeah.
Knowing that life machine's going to turn off, you're going to be able to hug her, because you haven't been able to hug her for 13 days. But then lying next to her and she died.
Yeah.
That is something that will always stay with you.
Yeah. It's awful, it's not nice, is it? I'm filling up now.
Hold on.
I am, I'm literally... It's awful, isn't it?
Yeah. Gosh, go on.
Sorry. It is, it's awful, isn't it?
That's the worst thing. Knowing you're going to die. You knew that you were going to turn up,
I mean, we don't normally like this on camera, do we? We don't, do we? This really is a... This
I think it's when you've got... Probably even if you haven't got children, you can resonate, but that was the killer for me.
Yeah.
I know there were monsters in that, but when she was talking in an interview, and when she put the context out there, and it could be, hopefully it'll never be anybody doing what she had to do with her daughter. But jeez, you can't comprehend that.
It's when she said she was waxing her hair.
Yeah. Because that was the only thing she could do, and then the day that she could finally touch her and cuddle her was the day that she was saying goodbye.
Sorry everybody, but yeah, this is a difficult one. It is, isn't it? This is difficult. Right, we'll leave it here then.
Yeah,
we'll leave it here, everybody. Tell us your thoughts down below. This one's really touched us, this story today. I hope we've done Sophie justice as well as her mother Sylvia. And to all you guys out there who have encountered hate, who have encountered things like this, we feel so sorry for you. I know you don't want our sympathy, but just keep fighting. Just do what you do. Just you yourselves do what makes you happy and try and battle through it. Hopefully change will come and people will become more tolerant to subcultures, the gay community, the LGBT community. Don't matter who you are, what you do in life, do what makes you happy, and let's just hope we can make this world a better place for everybody. But if I don't like using the word enjoy, but if you did enjoy this story, please don't forget to comment, share it, subscribe to the channel, because it does mean a lot to us. We do have a lot more stories. Some are going to be probably more tragic than this one, aren't they?
Yeah.
But please do all those things, and like I said, guys, we'll be back soon with more tales from a dark but at times glorious past. So stay safe, stay curious, everybody.